All right. Yesterday I made a video about the second novel in my Motorcycle Girl trilogy, Motorcycle Girl Descends into Hell, where I went and I explained, you're not supposed to do this. It's not good form for an author to explain his work, although the contemporary artist Joseph Boyce did. I couldn't understand Joseph Boyce until I finally found Carolyn Tisdale's interview book with him, where he explains what every single thing he did meant, and it clicked, and I was like, got it. If he hadn't done that, I would never have been able to understand his art. So sometimes it is just that way, and besides, I like breaking rules, so that's just the way I am. All right, so I wanted to do a thorough overview of what's going on here in the first book. This is called Every Angel is Terrifying, and it's set in Phoenix in the 1970s and the 80s as this girl is growing up. And she originally, there was a short story that I wrote which won first place in college. It was called Where the Sun Bleeds, and it was a short story where I imagined what it must have been like for my mother to have grown up in a small house in central Phoenix, the same neighborhood that the Spielbergs came from, and she knew them. Ann Spielberg was a friend of hers. That same neighborhood with a very tyrannical, patriarchal, very angry father who was a rocket scientist. And he was an absolute genius. He wasn't just a rocket scientist. He invented one of the first talking computers. He also invented the pilot's ejection seat. That ejection seat is depicted in the movie The Right Stuff as saving the life of Chuck Yeager, who was a close personal friend of his, played by Sam Shepard in the movie. That was my father's friend. So he would come over to the house and they would discuss all things aeronautic, and he was also subcontracting for the military out there to design rockets and missiles, these bombs and all these kinds of things. And he killed himself when he was about 43 years old, shot himself, as the father does here in this book as well. And she inherits his journals and notebooks. And there are three of them. This is the red one, and then there's a black one and a white one, corresponding to the three colors in alchemy. And so I've changed him into a genetic engineer who does have an interest in aeronautics and is friends with Chuck Yeager. I have Chuck Yeager in the book, who's frustrated, who really wanted to be more of a rocket scientist than a genetic engineer. But here he's subcontracting for NASA to design bacteria that will be resistant to any kind of cosmic radiation once it goes on board Skylab. So this is part of the novel is set in 1979 when Skylab crashed, and he had an experiment on there that failed, and that's the reason why I explain that he committed suicide. So then the title, Every Angel is Terrifying, that's taken from the second Duino elegy of Rilke, which is his masterpiece. If you've never read the Duino elegies and you have the slightest bit of interest in poetry, do so. In college, when I discovered the Duino elegies, especially as translated by Stephen Mitchell, who gets them right, I was blown away. And up to that point, I had little to no interest in poetry. And after I read them, I was like, someday I'm going to write poetry this good. This guy's just a maestro. So Every Angel is Terrifying. So it's interesting. It has a number of different meanings. I'm not sure exactly how Rilke thought about it, but it's interesting if you think of Gebser's idea of the disappearance of the muses. You can think of the angel as the muse whispering into the ear of Matthew, the gospel according to Matthew. That's an iconotype. You can look up paintings of that. So once the muse is gone, and when the muse disappears, now the angels have become terrifying. They're no longer talking to us in a humanistic way, but now we're dealing with what the current theoretician Peter Sloterdijk calls monstrous technologies, and that's what genetic engineering is. That's what the CERN particle collider is. Who knows? It could create a black hole with the stuff they're fucking around in these things. So that's what it means. We're dealing with terrifying technologies here. So he is also subcontracted with both the military. I changed the house from the house in Central Phoenix in the story that won first place in my senior year of college with the Arizona State University newspaper contest. I've changed the location to Luke Air Force Base and put the house on it so that they're growing up there. And it's very lonely for her. So I've transformed my mother into my dead girlfriend. They had very similar personalities. Both had low self-esteem. Both were very promiscuous. Both just had a victim mentality. So it was very easy to do so because I have her journals. The girl that committed suicide in my life, I have her journals. And so the lead character is based on her. I've changed her name to Sarah instead of Mary, but that's the lead. So Sarah Cynthia Smith is her name. Smith because I've changed my grandfather's last name. I kept his first two names, Samuel George. It was Samuel George Wagenseller, which he had been just 2 generations removed from coming over from Germany, where the name is Wagenseil. And so I changed it to Smith because he is a Smith. And the daughter creates this funny little word because she's good with language. She calls him a genetismith, like a blacksmith, so forth. So they have the name Smith. So he's contracting to create the first clone, the world's first clone. NASA has an interest in creating clones, human clones that will be able to withstand the rigors of outer space better and longer. Perhaps a journey to Mars. What human could withstand going a year out to Mars and 6 months back, or whatever it is, vice versa. And so that's what's going on here. So he creates a clone, and it's her. He tells the family that they're going to adopt this kid. His name is Peter, which means rock, of course. Keep that in mind. So every single thing, every single detail counts here. There's nothing trivial or frivolous. This is not a girl's scrapbook with random images where she goes, oh, look at this rock and that rock. That's surface. That's just the tip of the iceberg. So the image here that I've chosen is by this young German artist who's a friend of mine named Hannes Looney. And he created this image, possibly without realizing that what he has created here is what I call the paternal vulva. Now, the vulva for Lacan exists on, not the vulva, but the penis for Lacan, the phallus, exists on 3 different registers. On the biological level, it's simply the real, the level of the real penis. But on the level of the imaginary, then it becomes the imaginary phallus, like the phallus of Dionysus, let's say, or Hermes, ithyphallic gods on the mythical register. But for Lacan, everything that was the collective unconscious for Jung, he identifies with the imaginary in a dismissive way, because Lacan is a Freudian. And so on the symbolic level, then the phallus becomes the phallus that when the child has to accede to castration, symbolic castration, and realize that it is no longer the phallus for the mother, so that it can accede to the name of the father, because for him everything is paternal this, paternal that. Lacan's a patriarch. So I thought, well, let's do the same thing with the vulva then. After reading Deleuze's book on S&M, which is kind of contra Lacan, so we have the actual vulva on the level of the real, and then the imaginary vulva then is the mythological vulva, which is the age that corresponds to Jean Gebser's mythical consciousness structure, in which we have parthenogenetic goddesses who are producing gods, like Hera produces Hephaestus and so forth, parthenogenetically. That's a very old myth that goes back to the Egyptians and the Sumerians, the first generation, in Toynbee's terms, of high civilization. But the second generation corresponds to Gebser's mental consciousness structure. And then this is where the paternal vulva comes in. Suddenly we get male gods who can produce parthenogenetically, such as Zeus giving birth to Athena, or Adam being taken as a rib out from the side, or Eve rather, being taken as a rib out from the side of Adam. And that wound that Christ receives when he's on the cross and he's stuck in the side with the spear, that later does become a motif in medieval art. It's represented as a vagina. And so that's the paternal vulva, which in science is the same thing as Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. That's the basic myth of the father, the patriarchal God, stealing the biologically creative powers from the mother. And that's what science through genetic engineering is doing, okay? So there we have the setup. So this is the paternal vulva. So it's a perfect image for the book. Okay, let's do a flyby over the book and see what we see. Okay, and then so part 1. Now it's laid out in 7 parts. That's not accidental. 7 is a magical number. You can do all kinds of things with 7. There are the 7 traditional planets. Every 7 years, the planet Saturn puts you through a trial. Look back in your memory, and you'll see it. It's every 7 years, and so the 7 is important. The second book's in 7 parts as well. So, a small greenhouse in a large copper desert. So in a way, this is Luke Air Force Base, which is in northwest Phoenix. So in a way, that sort of reflects the personality, the low self-esteem personality of the girl growing up under this patriarchal father, and her mother is into the arts and astrology, and the father makes fun of astrology, of course. And so she's small, and she feels just dwarfed by this gigantic, masculine, patriarchal world that she's growing up in, and it's all run by men. You can imagine how difficult such a situation would be for a lonely girl growing up on a base, military base, surrounded by all these patriarchs giving her orders. And so she grows and grows and grows. And like Alice, and she is a little like Alice in Wonderland. I had her in mind as well. Alice is always wondering about things. I wonder why the 3 angles of a triangle don't add up to 180 degrees when you put them on a curved surface. So the girl is doing the same thing, although this is an X-rated Alice. It's an Alice for mature people. It's a grown-up version of Alice. This isn't a book for children. Okay, and then so there we get the patriarchal sort of Apocalypse Now type lineup of the military. And then, so we have her notebooks, and they're later going to be intertwined with her father's notebooks. So we're going to do a right brain, left brain, back and forth dance, and she will be making funny comments on her father's notes. So it's also the humanities heckling the sciences. So these are the opening lines. I was born dead in Phoenix, of all places. So you've got the death and resurrection right there in the first 2 lines. Resurrection. Phoenix was named Phoenix by who's the guy? I forget his name. Daryl's something. Back he was a mason, and they had the giant Hohokam Canal system, which was the most sophisticated irrigation system ever to be constructed anywhere in the world. And they knew that they could reanimate Phoenix by pouring water through those canals and then bringing in citrus fields, like in Italy. And then so there's all these ironies going through here. And there's also a back and forth duet between direct quotes from my dead girlfriend's journals and then me imitating her. This is me, the first 3 lines and then this paragraph. At least that's what my mother told me. They pulled me out and I wasn't breathing. The doctor had to hold up my tiny blue body like a dead fish ready for gutting. And they had to put oxygen in me until I started breathing. And now this is a direct quote from her journal. I mean, you have to stick your head underground before your eyes can light up, right? And then beat me again. I don't know, though. And then this paragraph is me. And then so here's her family on the base. And now these are my actual grandparents. This is the rocket scientist's father, my mother's father, and this is my mother sitting right there in the center, and this is my grandmother. I retained their names, Dorothy and Sam. But Dorothy's name is an allusion to the Wizard of Oz, because even though this is not a kid's book, it does weave themes in from those books, from Alice in Wonderland, Through the Looking Glass, Wizard of Oz, the creation of a paracosm, which is an alternate reality that will eventually take place in the 3rd book, in Toto. Okay, so these are real family photographs. And here's her again, me imitating her. This is something she would say. The 3 of us again. Mother looks happy. Father looks like he was thinking about maybe chucking me over the edge. Just can't see the upside. She never can. But that'll change. She goes through many, many transformations in this book. And then, so we have some of her descriptions, although this is my writing over here. Pink granite canyons, oases of clustered date palms overrun by swollen green-blue flies, hot, dry, cinnamon-colored air, split ripe skins of pale oranges, lemons, limes, grapefruits, lizards scurrying over crumbled plaster walls, ambergris twilights with the liquefying sun dissolving into an ocean of brown dirt, taking fire down into hell to light it up. All the dead will watch it while we sleep. The orange tree orchard where Old Man lived was always cool to walk in. That's, of course, a reference to the Garden of Eden, where God likes to take walks in the cool of the evening. Shady and nurturing verdigris leaves, surrounded by reticulations of gleaming irrigation ditches and canals with flat brown enamel surfaces. Fields of cotton attacked by farmers with predatory skeletal rows of iridescent sprinkling machines. The sun, an ancient, ever-present God watching over all. He has many eyes, you know. They always watch you, judging you. Eyes everywhere. I have one in the middle of my palm that watches me at night when I sleep. And there it is. I know who you are. Believe me, I do. And then this is her, a direct quote from her journal. Blood is time in the form of a substance. I absorb time through my pores. I know that, and I feel that, and I am absorbing epidermal time constantly. And then so our styles mesh pretty well, I think. I can imitate her almost to the point of channeling her. And then this is a reference to the lizard named Bill in Alice in Wonderland, whom I think is kind of a funny character. Okay, and then let's see. So these are real here. This is my grandfather. He designed this rocket that is in the Smithsonian, one of the first atmospheric weather rockets. And it's called the Judy, which is, of course, named after Zeus, Jupiter. And it's interesting because he was a Sagittarius, which is ruled by Jupiter. So that's the irony of him mocking the mother for being interested in astrology. The Judy rocket represents the most recent attempt to manufacture a meteorological rocket at the lowest possible cost and so forth. He published articles in these magazines, Arizona Engineer and Scientist. And then here's an actual magazine that he was in, although I've changed it. This is all fake right here. Bioengineering Microbes for Space Stations by Samuel George Smith shows how bacteria can be genetically altered to survive in exospheric orbits on board any potential space station. And then we had a really rough time trying to imitate the fonts. We got it not 100%, but it's pretty damn close. But that my brother does all my tech. I had a rough time with that. And then so here is my grandfather. He too was bald. I have only one memory of him, and when I was about 4 years old, and he was bald, giving me graham crackers. That's the only memory I have of him. And this is the next child. This is my mother's brother, David, who's gone now, just as my mother is. And then so these are, notice that as you go through the book, it tells the story of media through photography. The first images are black and white. The next images look like 70s Polaroids, which is essentially what they are. And I'm pretending that this is the genetically engineered kid named Peter, father with Peter at about age 4. And then there's some, that needs to be high quality display viewed. Let me see. But let me see, just quickly display performance, high quality. That one likes to slip back. Well, anyways, I'll fix it later, but it's clear in the book, though. A father with me in the front yard after the cooling summer monsoons have made everything silvery mirror black. Little pools of gold starlight all over the yard and the street. Ours was the only house. Andromeda, he says, she's chained to a rock. And Cassiopeia, her mother, is just beneath her. Ursa Major, the great bear, and her little daughter, Ursa Minor. Both are mothers and daughters, because there's a mother-daughter theme conflict that will go on through the narrative. And there's a great red dragon that lies between them. At the end of the book, the girl, Sarah, will transform into a red dragonfly in her imagination, of course. Hercules is on his way, though, to kill the dragon. Don't we go to the stars when we die, Daddy? Don't we become one of them? He was quiet, as though mulling that over, possibly because he had just finished telling me that we do become stars when we die. You can see the Milky Way there, he goes on. It has 2 points where it intersects the zodiac. One is between Taurus and Gemini, and then at the bottom end it crosses between Scorpio and Sagittarius. Those are openings to the underworld, the realm of the dead. The Aztecs called the Milky Way the road of Xibalba. What's in the underworld, I ask. That's where the dead go when they die, he says. To the stars, in other words. That's just the beginnings of her heckling her father there. And this is the book. This is what she will be reading later on. The first notebook, the red notebook with the John D. Hermetic symbol in it. Father's red notebook. What the fuck do you think this means? She's still just a little kid here. And this is where she grows up. maybe fun for a child to play with all the rocks and so forth. And so she does indeed have a rock collection. And here's the rock collection. Now, this is not just looking at rocks and saying, oh, gee, isn't this pretty? That's only part of it. We start with basalt, which is the first rock geologically that was ever made on the earth. So we begin there. I never played with dolls. I played with rocks. I picked up rocks from the desert everywhere I went, like these. Black volcanic basalt. Looks like it was made in hell. But look, there's a light shining in the darkness. That's the spirit that will be impregnating the rocks eventually. Then turquoise, the sky rock. Turquoise, a tooth from the beak of a red macaw. Malachite and chrysocolla, blue-green cells in a primal tide pool. These are all made out of copper. Turquoise comes from copper being transformed. But so notice that we get the rainbow. As we go through, we get the rainbow. The rainbow will be a major theme in the book. Purple quartz looks like it fell out of a rainbow. Fool's gold, something dwarves must have made. A trilobite fossil left over from some ancient vanished sunlit sea. This desert was once the bottom of a Jurassic ocean where tiny creatures shone with blue-green bioluminescence. An Indian arrowhead made out of black obsidian. Were they hunting mammoths? It cut my dirty pink-painted fingernail when I picked it up. And then so on as we go through the rocks, and we get to the final rock, which is a rainbow rock, azurite. Dream, and this is a direct quote here from her journal. Dream, I found this rock and opened it up. The inside was made up of bands of rainbows. It was a psychedelic rock where if you licked it, you'd trip. I licked it, and it was sour. And then I added the word here, agate, which is what this is called. Each of these rocks has a symbolic significance that will have themes developed later on in the book. And also notice that we are going up the chain of being. I am a supporter of the traditional great chain of being. I know some people want to deconstruct it, that's fine. But we begin with rocks, and then we move up to insects. And then next chapter, there will be a journey to the zoo. We'll move up to animals there. So here's the dragonfly that will later turn up at the end when she transforms into a red dragonfly in her imagination. And then there's that, the death's head moth, Hercules, or no, that's Orion, who is stung by the scorpion. So then a scorpion appears in the house, and the kid, Peter, is the only one who has the courage to stamp on it. I've killed a couple of scorpions that have gotten into houses, and when you step on them, they don't crunch. They're rubbery. You really got to grind them down if you want to kill them. And then, so moving up the chain of being, we've got worms that are making the earth fertile. So that's the stage setting. And then part two is now the journey through Xibalba. Now this is a character out of the art of the basket makers, who are the ancestors, early ancestors of the Anasazi, up from the four corners. And I counted on this, it's obviously a shaman, and I counted, this is a bird, so it's a bird taking flight. There are 13, exactly 13 dots there, or sticks, or whatever they are. And there are 13 levels to Xibalba. So consequently, we're going to have 13 sub-chapters here as we go through this. They're going on a journey through Arizona. So Arizona plays the role of Xibalba. Later in the second book, Phoenix plays the role of Dante's Inferno. So we begin with the Arizona epic. The story of Arizona is an epic of geology in which the main characters are granite and basalt, sandstone and copper, limestone and shale, uranium and aluminum, quartzite and breccia, iron oxide, carbonates, phosphates, gold, and silver. Each of them is part of an epic poem that has been inscribed onto the mud-wet tablets of the earth over billions of years. Pink sandstone vanilla swirl. And then, so, this is, she is the motorcycle girl. She owns at first when she's a kid, a mini bike that's exactly like this, and this is me in a cameo. I couldn't find the right picture, so I had to substitute me, and then I made it up, this little line. This cute kid from another family dropped by, and we let him borrow the mini bike. He looks like he's riding on Mars. Just so there are a lot of funny jokes like that all the way through. And now that they go to what I call the zoo full of dead things, because these animals are pathetic. At night, the sun god becomes a jaguar. You know what? And this is a direct quote from her journal. I felt pain in my heart that I'll never forget. In my mind, my heart is small and flimsy, like a little sliver of meat just crumpled up into a pile, or just dangling there. It's difficult to admit, but I have some kind of death obsession. And now this is me. What would it like to be torn into fresh red chunks of flopping meat by a jaguar? You wouldn't die immediately. You would feel knife claws slicing into you, teeth gutting your entrails as its monstrous, aggressive, terrifying skull worked its way in, looking for your heart. And then they go through. This is a picture. Actually, this is pretending that this is the father, and this is Peter, but it's actually my son. It's a picture of my son. He puts in a cameo. It's kind of a running joke that Peter is never played by the same actor. It's a running joke. And here, I love this kind of bird. And then it says, Father and Peter feeding a red-winged blackbird a piece of the sun. The raven has orange stripes because he's already swallowed most of the sun. He's got it inside him and it's glowing through his black feathers. She just would say things like that. That's me imitating her, but that's exactly 100% her mood. And so my language is more elaborate, naturally. But okay, and then they go to the Grand Canyon, and the pictures get larger and larger and larger, more and more epic as we go up the chain of being through animals. In the next book, her art will come in, so we'll move up to the level of human culture. And then notice that her rock collection has grown into a mountain collection. So you see how the chapters weave and weave back, they link back. It's written in a spiral. You have to catch that. Now they're looking at the planets, it's Saturn, all these epic mountains. Arizona is a pretty amazing place. It really is. And the other thing about this is that it's never been represented literarily before. Certainly not Phoenix. Maybe parts of northern Arizona have been with Edward Abbey, maybe. I don't know. They're not great books, though. And then we have Superstition Mountain, which is a spooky place. Let me tell you, I have the father telling spooky stories about it. It really is spooky. You don't fuck with the Superstition Mountain. And then it explodes. It starts exploding and looking like a French symbolist poem here. It's alluding back to Mallarmé, whose poetry I love, and I read him in college as well as Rilke. Okay, and then we're looking at the Hohokam. Now we've got an epic 2-page spread looking at their Pueblo. They weren't actually a Pueblo people. This is a late influence on them of the Puebloan peoples. At the tail end of their culture, they did have a Mayan Aztec ball court. And then in the Herd Museum, where they see the famous Aztec sun god and the 5 suns. They have 5 worlds. The Hopi have 4. The Navajos, sometimes, it depends on who you ask. Sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's 4, depending. And then he goes, but it's also a foreshadowing of Book 3, where we're going to go back in through a wormhole in the astral plane and reanimate Aztec civilization with all kinds of funny characters. It will be the earlier incarnations of these same people. For instance, we will encounter the father again as a sacrificial priest who tears people's hearts out. And that's what he's explaining what this God does here. He doesn't realize it's a dim memory of a previous lifetime of his. So this thing is pretty epic. There's nothing trivial. I get the impression that some people think it's frivolous and trivial, just a random scrapbook. Boy, those people do not know me. I don't do anything trivial, nothing trivial at all. I wouldn't even bother. So all of this is woven together. We go through all of these mountains, one mountain after the next, as they journey down to central Phoenix, and eventually they're going to end up in Tucson here at the airplane graveyard. And we went and saw this, and it was unbelievable. These are all relics left over from World War II. And so now we're moving up the chain of being into the realm of human technology. Skeletons made out of metal, and this is the 13th level of Xibalba. And then we have part 3, Those Who Favor Fire. That's, of course, a quote from the Robert Frost poem. And this is Skylab, which will feature in here. So this is broken down into several subchapters. What can be done with DNA? And so this coincides with her sexual maturity starting. She says she started masturbating when she was about 8 years old, and that's exactly what my dead girlfriend told me she did. Popped her cherry with a banana, also not me making that up, that's from her. And then her genitals start becoming fascinating around 8, 9, 10 as she's growing up. And then she's listening to, there's a scene here where Chuck Yeager visits the house. And they discuss the ethics of bioengineering. And I have Yeager very skeptical about the whole thing of producing clones. Again, every angel is terrifying. That's the whole point of it. But the Father has already done it. And I found out later, after all this was written, chasing a footnote from Baudrillard's book, Simulacra and Simulation, that there is a book that recounts that human clones were actually made around this time period in the 70s. So somehow I got it right. It wasn't done, it wasn't funded by the government or any scientific institution. It was done by independents. And they did it outside of the United States, on some island in the Pacific. This book came out, I think, in 76 or 77, and I'm convinced that Michael Crichton read it and used it as the basis for Jurassic Park. So there apparently are clones wandering around. They're living in their 40s. I actually checked with a medium. A medium told me that before I discovered the book, and then shortly, maybe a month after that, then I discovered the footnote in Baudrillard and pursued it and read the book. So she was talking about the clones that were made. So we've already done it. Okay? And then she's growing up out in the desert. Now, the form makers is what is my term for the spirits who make forms. There's a whole zoology of them. So you have angel form makers who handle the macrocosm. You have discarnate humans who have learned how to play the genetic keyboard, and they create forms on various planets. This is all real. So I just created the term the form maker, so it doesn't have Christian connotations. And that's essentially what they are. So she's about 14. Her mother gives her for Christmas a set of watercolors, and she starts painting. And these are the very first paintings that I ever did. They're watercolor in a notebook. I was just fucking around. I had spent my entire childhood drawing, but only in either pencil or charcoal. So I've been drawing things for, since I was 7 years old, and at the same time that's when I started writing short stories. But these I did probably, my first experiments with paint, probably in my 30s. And so all of this art is mine. This is the first oil painting I did, maybe a few years after that. Burnt sun gold palm tree girl, she calls it. And then this guy too. And these are some pastel sketches that I did. This I did specifically for the book. And this is an old painting. She has these dreams that correspond to the paintings that sort of animates them. And here I did this specifically for the book, and she says, the tree god is really the sun when it enters into the earth and transforms into an egg at the earth's core. The spirit being that was inside it hatched, but then you know what it did? It became this tree god that shot up out of the earth. And so I drew out what it looked like using pastels. And then she gives it another caption. Black gold vein sap burning through every limb, drawing its energy not from the sun, but from the sun that is inside the earth at its core, where Erda dreams of things yet unmade. Erda is, of course, the Scandinavian goddess of the earth, corresponding to Gaia. Then we have the azimuth of descent, where the Father gets the bad news here in this letter. You can read it. It's clear in the final version. This is just, it needs to be put into final display version so you can read it. But this is a fake letter we made up from NASA to Dr. Samuel G. Smith, telling him that his experiment on board Skylab with the bacteria has failed. And then shortly after that, we see Skylab falling. It falls and crashes, and they actually witness it. And then this is their backyard, which is really cool, but it's going to be full of creepy things, scorpions and black widows and stuff like that. You want to stay clear of things like little forest groves like that. And then the kid, Peter, burns down the orchard. So we start to see the results of every angel being terrifying as Peter gets sicker and sicker and sicker. When you're fucking around with genetic engineering, the ethics are, what if the clone doesn't work? Remember Dolly, the sheep? Supposedly the first, well, it wasn't the first animal clone. Back in the 50s, they cloned frogs at first. But the sheep got morbidly obese. So, and weird things do tend to happen to cloned animals. It's well known in the profession. Every angel is terrifying. Part 4, Dionysus Redivivus. So now we go back and forth. This is taken from Goethe. Formation, transformation, the eternal mind's eternal recreation, or recreation. It's a pun. And then so now the father's notebooks come in, and they're indicated using typewriter text. And then she starts going back and forth, heckling science, sort of making fun of it, but also in awe of it. And then we look at evolution from a Goethean point of view, in which mutations are not random. They are not. They are not random. They are not accidental. So that what the father, because he doesn't have the full paradigm of the form makers, is wondering is, if the mutations are not random, then who's making them? And you have to consider this. You have to consider the jawbone was the game changer in the evolution of fish, because they started out without jaws. See, there's no hinge here. And consequently, they were small and easily preyed upon by large brontoscorpions and monstrous things like that. So some sagacious fish shifted a gill bone forward to become a hinged jaw. Now, that can't be by accident. I don't care what biologist you're talking to. That's not accidental. No fucking way. And then so here it is. Still haven't developed teeth yet, just using a serrated edge. And consequently, with the jaw, they were able to eat larger and larger and larger creatures. And this thing was a monster. Behold Dunkleosteus in the Devonian. But no teeth yet, just a serrated jawbone. Okay, and then she discovers porn, as I did, on Adults Only, on cable, late at night. Has fun with that. Very explicit stuff. But then, of course, we have to have, in a chapter where we're considering the evolution and mutations, we have to have the genitals in there too, because those are the tools that the form makers are using to paint on the canvas of the earth in genetic tones. So that's why they're in there. That's why I drew these. Dionysus Redivivus. God uses penises as brushes for painting in genetic pigments all over the earth canvas. So now we have more Goethe, the actualization of the idea that's in Goethe and in Schelling, that everything in nature is the manifestation of a Platonic idea with a capital I, as it is. But who's having these ideas then? They don't really answer that question. So if they are ideas, then whose ideas are they? And so that's sort of what both the father and the daughter are wondering about as they go through and they look at the evolution of whales, going all the way up to Moby Dick. Then we look at the evolution of horses. They started at the size of cats, and they gradually grow larger and faster. Then we look at this is a proto-giraffe. The neck still hasn't gone all the way up. But in terms of Goethe's law of the correlation of parts, if the neck grows larger, then you have to take away from something else. For every addition to an animal form, there has to be a subtraction. If a lizard wants to grow long, it has to give up its limbs in order to grow long. So that's Goethe's law of the correlation of parts. I've also applied it to reincarnation. It works very well with reincarnation as well. You go too far in one lifetime, you're going to come back in the opposite direction. And this monstrous thing is fucking crazy. Who thought this one up? Another drunk god? Looks like a gorilla combined with a horse, and it's just a sloth, a giant sloth. So there's some really cool animals here. The first pigs were 6-foot-tall predators, like wolves, that would have torn a human to shreds. This is the first rhino, the largest land mammal on Earth. All this occurred back in the Oligocene epoch, after the dinosaurs are gone, of course. And then I borrowed Sloterdijk's term anthropogeny from his Spheres trilogy. As we then go through and examine hominid evolution, we apply Goethe's law of the correlation of parts to the skull. How, if you look at these three skulls, the skull of a gorilla here, all the emphasis is down here on the jaws, at the cost of the cranium up here. But as we get to the humans, the jaw becomes smaller while the skull becomes larger and larger as the brain gets larger. So when you add to something in a biological organism, you have to take something away from it. Okay, and then we just go through evolution, all the different species of hominids. I like this one. This is an AI-generated image because I needed to fill a space here. because the Lucy image I had was copyright, so I had to subtract it. But I think it did a pretty good job animating Lucy. She looks pissed off, so I have her. So this is Lucius. For some reason, there was only a male version of Lucy. Lucius on the ground without diamonds? I guess this guy's broke. And here comes Lucy. I wonder why she's so mad. Probably Lucius, because let's face it, it's always Lucius. He's always getting in trouble with the wife. So she makes a lot of funny comments, and they do get funnier and funnier, especially in the second book. I think the second book, her comments are much, much funnier. So they liked this. Silicon oxygen fantasia. And this. Sandstone magma metamorphosis. She likes words and the way they fit together in the mouth. Although these are my words. And also this. Metamorphic blood rock. That reminds me, I'm on my period. Need to get a tampon. Red ochre comes from places like this, where the rocks bleed. That's an allusion to the original short story, Where the Sun Bleeds, that I wrote in college. That was the nucleus for this. And then so we go along through evolution all the way up. We're going up the scale of the chain of being. That forms the model for the book. And she says here, like, I wonder who got her pregnant. Likely suspect. Yeah, likely, yeah. Mm-hmm. And then going up the chain here, getting to the Neanderthals. You want to know who she's afraid of? This guy. He's not aiming at a mammoth. Yep. 5 now is a mini novel within the novel. There's this Hopi proverb here. Stories are powerful things in which almost anything can happen. They are. They're the most powerful thing in the world. 5, Skyman and Gravity Girl. And so her father basically is swapped out for another Skyman, because the father was fascinated with rockets. Women usually, my mother essentially married her father. Her husband was an engineer designing aircraft engines. So Skyman is just a helicopter pilot on the base that she falls in love with. She's 17 at this point. He's 23. And here they are in Hopi mythology. For the Hopi, the sky is masculine, the sun is masculine, and the earth is female. And here they are. And then so to sink down into the earth is also to ascend upwards into the sky. That's from her journals. And then she's out riding her mini bike, so she's growing now, but she's 16, 17-ish, getting a little large to be riding a kid's mini bike, and so the helicopter pilot makes fun of her. But actually she's going to become the motorcycle girl. In the second book, the Native Americans call her Sarah Motorcycle Girl, and they call Jonah, the helicopter pilot, Jonah Helicopter Pilot. And they say, are all you Bahanas, that's their word for white guys, are all you Bahanas married to your machines? And she goes, yeah, I guess so. We kind of are. She's examining citrus fruits and the symbolism inside them. And then all of a sudden she comes to this downed helicopter where the guy, the pitot tube, which is right here, has gotten clogged with grasshoppers. And so he's there cleaning them out. So what this turns out to be is a retelling of the story of Cupid and Psyche. Cupid has wings, and then they have a very troubled relationship because she violates a taboo and so forth. And it's also the scene like from, you have to, when you take a stereotype scene like this, or a cliched scene in let's say Natural Born Killers, where the guy goes, want to go for a ride? It's that same kind of cliche, except I've done it quite a bit differently to make it so it's not a cliche and it's totally fresh. And I did that by having him show her what every part of the helicopter means. And then so this is him giving her a lecture. Later on it's going to be the other way around when she unfurls her astronomical knowledge and he becomes the pupil and she the teacher. So you got to pay attention to these things that move around and relate. There's lots of stuff to chew on in this. She starts looking up dictionary definitions of levity versus gravity because now she's having sex for the first time, a sexual relationship, and she normally thinks of herself as Gravity Girl, or he calls her Gravity Girl because she's always kind of a downer. but she wants to become Levity Girl through the orgasms. So the orgasms themselves send her into orbit around the Earth, and she becomes Levity Girl. So now we've got a helicopter pilot who starts introducing her to drugs, and there's 7 of them, of course. 7 is the key number, and the drugs are, I put them in the order basically that I was introduced to them in high school. Is essentially what happened. And then so we have beer, and I got this interesting Ham's beer, which I've never heard of. It's not grammatically correct. The beer, refreshing. Okay, so I like that it's grammatically not correct. Something's missing. And then it's Ham's beer, which makes me think of Noah, who sentenced his son Ham for seeing him naked to exile from the land of sky blue waters, because this is Skyman bringing the beer from the sky. And then they usually travel around in the deuce and a half around the military base looking for secret places to fuck. And then they also go out into the desert. And the second drug I did in high school was speed. And this is, of course, a reference to the red pill. You take the red pill and you go on the adventure, like in Alice, or the Matrix, I guess. And the marijuana, and then I described what the effects of it are like, and then I did a little cocaine, not that much actually, but the dead girlfriend did quite a bit of it actually. And then they do ecstasy and have ecstatic sex. And then they do LSD, which was for me the game changer. That was mind blowing. We went out into the desert in the late 80s and took I don't know how much LSD and how many times, and had one awesome trip after the next. And it was the first time I ever had a philosophical idea that the reality that we see it's an illusion. It's like a stage. Something else is going on behind the stage and up above the stage and so forth around the stage. This is a stage. It's not. So she starts having these breakthroughs in each of the books. It's one breakthrough after the next. And this is the beginnings of her transformation. Then he tells her about his crash, because he has a limp, and he hasn't wanted to tell her about the crash, but he was out trying to find a downed Piper cub out near the Grand Canyon, and then his helicopter failed and crashed near the Three Mesas. And the Native Americans, the Hopi there, the Hisatsinom is what they want to be called nowadays, they come and they nurse him back to health. Just like Joseph Beuys, the contemporary artist, he tells that story that he was a Nazi Stuka pilot who was shot down, and these Tibetan shaman people, or whoever they were, Siberian, nursed him back to life. So I borrowed that for the Cupid and Psyche myth, but it's also the myth of the dying and reviving God. His limp is on the left. That's always significant. The God is wounded on the left. You got to pay attention to all these details. You have to know your mythology to catch all this. This is the dragonfly again, right here. And the pottery maker explains the symbolism of the dragonfly. The dragonfly keeps coming back and going through one transformation after the next, one transformation after the next. The dragonfly is a key theme here, and they're regarded as messengers of the spirit world by the Hopi. They bring messages. So in a way, they correspond to the rainbow goddess Iris, who brings messages. And we also have this rainbow of drugs going on here. And the 7th drug is psilocybin. My psilocybin experience was a pure nightmare, and so I've given it to her as a nightmare. Now, what I've done is I've taken the mouse's tail from Alice in Wonderland, where he's got the mouse. This is called figurative verse. George Herbert used to do it. He would do like a poem in the shape of an altar. And here what I've done is make it the birth canal. And this is exactly what it felt like when I experienced it. The whole world contracted into tunnel vision, and me curling up on the ground in the desert as a ball, and going through this. It was awful. It was unbelievable. And that basically, she comes out of it. It takes a few hours, and that basically ends the relationship as far as she's concerned. She knows this guy is going to go down. He's going to go down. And so part 6 is a garden full of microscopic gods. So now as she's recovering from the loss of the relationship, she goes back to look at the notebooks, which begin now with the very earliest origins of life on Earth, namely bacteria. And then so we go through the whole endosymbiosis theory of Lynn Margulis, bacteria within bacteria within bacteria. And she finds out that she had learned from what Jonah had told her about the Hopi that they have 4 worlds. And we're living in the 4th world, and they emerged out of these 3 previous worlds. Turns out, science says we have 4 worlds too. The Hadean, the Archean, the Proterozoic, and the Phanerozoic, which we're still in. And we also have an emergence myth. Isn't that interesting? Bacteria coming out of thermoplasmic vents. The Native American mythology starts to seem more and more plausible as we compare it through the book with the scientific narratives. This I definitely wanted to resemble a Rudolf Steiner blackboard drawing. The virus invented the orgasm, essentially, and I do believe that viruses are alive. They're intentional, they reproduce, and it's very, very intentional. Science has that wrong. And then, so we go through and we look at all these, and there's a few jokes about sea monkeys and kitschy art. So this book is there's nothing random or trivial about it. You have to think about every single line, everything you're reading, and all the pictures. It's one of the first image novels where the images are integral to the text. If you deleted these images, there would be no book. And so this is really, it's a very original thing. I'm proud to say that it's extremely original. And originality, usually people don't know what to make of it because it's so weird. That should be a signal to you. Now I remember, I sympathize because I remember when House of Leaves came out, Danielewski's House of Leaves, and I flipped through it and I thought, this just looks gimmicky to me. There's nothing there, no profundity at all. Turns out I was wrong. It's extremely profound and emotionally moving. So that's probably how people, when they first perceive this, think of it as it must just look like a mess. It's a collection of images. Part 7, then, the final one, is Red Dragonfly, referring to the red dragon of the apocalypse. And then the father's suicide. And then she decides to journey on a larger, this is her second transformation as motorcycle girl, which is a dirt bike that she uses to drive out to visit the Palo Verde nuclear power plant, which is the largest power plant in the United States. If anything should go wrong with that, the Southwest would become absolutely uninhabited. It would make Chernobyl look like kindergarten by comparison. And so she wants to go see it. There's a few jokes here about camels, and she can't find a gas station, so I threw in all these gas stations from, let's see, this one here isn't even, this is in Morocco, as are the camels here are in Israel, but you can't tell that the deserts look the same. And then she finally gets there, goes to a convenience store. These are real now. And loads up on junk food. And there's the power plant. And she compares it to Valhalla because it has a rainbow. In order to get to Valhalla, you have to go up the Rainbow Bridge. And then she finds a damaged insect. Now, this is from a real woman who used to be a friend of mine and William Irwin Thompson's. And this is a dragonfly that she went around. Cornelia Hesse-Honegger is her name. She's still alive. She went around to various power plants around Europe and so forth and found dead insects that are obviously genetically damaged by radiation. She found flies with 2 heads, all kinds of wild stuff. And then so I got her permission to put one of her paintings of what she found. These are real, but she's painting them. And she says, did radiation do this? You bet it did. And then she decides to study the life cycle of a dragonfly. There's 3 phases. There's the nymph, which is not very exciting. Then there's the pupa, which starts to unfold with beauty. And then there's the 3rd stage of the adult, the red dragonfly. She goes through 3 transformations as motorcycle girl. The first one, the nymph, was her on the mini bike out in the desert there. The second one was the pupa, which is the one she's in right now with the dirt bike. And the final one is going to be the Honda MVX 250 speed bike, sport bike that she rides at the end. That's her spreading her wings. she gets into a confrontation with her mother, who's been beating her all along. She's 18 now. She fights back. She starts capitalizing her letters. She hasn't been capitalizing them through the whole book because she's had low self-esteem, but after fighting back against her mother, she starts capitalizing her letters. You got to pay attention to these things. Every detail counts in a book like this. And then 2 months later, the mother dies of cancer. She takes the life insurance money and buys a motherfucking Honda MVX 250. Notice that it has wings on it, like the Dragonfly in the adult stage. That's the reason why I chose it. And then there she is. Gravity Girl is dead now. I am the motorcycle girl. My name is Sarah Cynthia Smith, and I'm headed for Phoenix. This is an image I got from AI, and it hit the nail on the head. All right, that's it. I've gone through the book. I've given you the semiotic skeleton. You should be able to follow it now and read through it. All right, it's available on Amazon. I'm willing to send you, anyone who wants the PDF, as long as you're not somebody that I know has been hostile to me in the past, I'll send you the PDF. Just hit me up at johndavidebert@gmail.com. I also still do astrology readings. Hit me up there, same address. All right, that's it.